Out on the rolling plains west of Abilene, the land looks the way it always has. Cracked caliche stretching flat to the horizon, mesquite standing low and stubborn in the heat, a shimmer rising off the earth that most people driving through never stop to question. But that shimmer on the horizon isn't only summer anymore. Something vast is being built out there, on approximately 800 to over 1,000 acres of West Texas scrub, depending on whether both campuses are counted. Something that runs hotter than the Texas sun and is quietly beginning to reshape the climate of everything around it. AI data centers. That shimmer on the horizon, it has a name now, and a scale most people aren't prepared for. As of March 2026, Crusoe Energy has announced a combined total projected capacity across 2 adjacent Abilene campuses of 2.1 gigawatts, a 1.2 gigawatt Stargate campus built for Oracle and OpenAI, and a separate new 900 megawatt campus purpose-built for Microsoft. To put that in terms you can feel rather than just read. The Stargate campus alone spans 8 buildings and approximately 4 million square feet. The adjacent Microsoft campus adds 2 further buildings on top of that, a footprint larger than most downtowns in West Texas, rising out of the caliche and scrub of Taylor County. The first phase alone, 2 buildings at nearly 1 million square feet, came online in the first half of 2025. And that campus, built for Oracle and OpenAI as part of the Stargate initiative, sits adjacent to a newly announced separate 900 megawatt campus being purpose-built for Microsoft's AI workloads, with a dedicated on-site power plant engineered to keep the servers running whether the grid cooperates or not. Now zoom out, then zoom back in. 2.1 gigawatts of planned capacity is roughly the continuous power draw of a mid-sized American city. The kind of electricity demand that, until recently, you would have associated with hundreds of thousands of homes, factories, hospitals, all running simultaneously. That is the macro. Here is the micro. Inside a single server rack, processors running AI training workloads generate heat at intensities that dwarf anything the rolling plains sun produces at ground level. Nearly all of the electricity a data center consumes ends up as heat, and the cooling systems that remove it release that heat directly into the surrounding environment. Step outside the exhaust vents on a summer afternoon in Abilene, already one of the hottest cities in Texas, and you are standing in air that has been pushed well past ambient temperature before it even touches the open grassland beyond the fence line. The phenomenon researchers have begun calling the data heat island effect mirrors the urban heat island, where infrastructure and human activity make a site hotter than the surrounding rural land, and AI systems rely on high-powered computers operating around the clock, generating substantial heat as a byproduct. In a city with dense pavement, trees, and buildings, that heat disperses into a complex thermal environment. But the rolling plains around Abilene are not a city. They are open grassland, thin-soiled, sparsely vegetated, with almost no canopy to absorb or redistribute heat. Unlike healthy grass and vegetation, which cool the air while adding moisture through evapotranspiration, data center heat tends to dry out the local atmosphere and weaken the moisture recycling that supports precipitation, working directly against the processes that living landscapes depend on. And this is where the rolling plains' particular vulnerability comes in. This ecosystem sits at the edge of what ecologists sometimes call its thermal tolerance, the narrow band of temperature and moisture conditions within which its native species can function. The side oats grama, the blue grama grass, the black-tailed prairie dog colonies that once covered this region, they evolved for extreme heat, yes, but for a specific sealing of it, paired with specific soil conditions that allow roots and microbes to survive between rains. field measurements taken at data center campuses in the Phoenix metropolitan area, facilities ranging from 36 to 169 megawatts, smaller than what Abilene is now hosting, recorded downwind air temperature increases as high as 2.2 degrees Celsius, with measurable thermal signatures detected up to 500 meters from facility perimeters. Those facilities used air-cooled condenser systems. Abilene's cooling architecture differs, though the on-site power generation and overall heat load remain a legitimate concern. Scale that to a campus drawing over a gigawatt of power in an ecosystem with even less vegetation to buffer the effect, and the margin that native species depend on begins to compress. Consider the Texas horned lizard. It is already in serious decline across West Texas, its range shrinking, its numbers dropping, and its survival is bound tightly to one creature: the harvester ant. Harvester ants are acutely sensitive to soil temperature. Their colonies regulate depth and foraging timing around narrow thermal windows in the ground. When soil temperatures rise even modestly above those windows, foraging stops, colony productivity drops, and the lizards that depend on them for nearly their entire diet go hungry. The lizard does not need a catastrophic heat event to disappear from a patch of grassland. It needs only a consistent, modest push, a few degrees of additional warmth held in the soil through the night, to tip the balance. The heat is only half the story, though. The other half is invisible, underground and running out. The Texas horned lizard's dependence on harvester ants is one of those ecological threads that, once you see it, you can't unsee. So here's a quick one. Do you think most Texans living near Abilene actually know that lizard is already disappearing? Drop your answer in the comments below. Now, let's follow the other half of this story underground. That other half of the story begins not with a pump or a pipe, but with a shallow depression in the earth you might walk right past without recognizing it for what it is. Scattered across the rolling plains of Taylor County and the counties surrounding it are playa lakes, wide saucer-shaped wetland depressions that fill after heavy rain and slowly return to cracked clay as the dry season reasserts itself. They look, at first glance, like nothing more than low spots in the grassland. But these ephemeral pools are sustained by precipitation alone, with little or no outlet flow, losing their volume to evaporation and transpiration across hot summers and prolonged droughts, sometimes vanishing almost entirely. And yet, for the time they hold water, they are among the most consequential small habitats on the continent. The southern Great Plains, which the rolling plains are part of, serves as the primary migration corridor for several million ducks and geese moving through the central flyway. During migration, playas are often filled with spectacular numbers of cranes, waterfowl, and shorebirds, and they serve as critical refueling points for shorebirds making their way to wintering areas on the Gulf Coast or south of the border. Think of them as fuel stations on a highway that has no detours. The birds that use this corridor, sandhill cranes, American avocets, long-billed curlews, and dozens of other shorebird and waterfowl species, have timed their journeys over thousands of years to water that is supposed to be there. The playas are not a nice-to-have. They are the infrastructure of an entire migratory system. Now here is where the thread running underground connects to the campus rising out of the 𝐒𝐡𝐢 west of Abilene. Many large data centers in hot climates rely heavily on evaporative cooling, systems that pull heat out of server halls by evaporating enormous volumes of water into the dry air. Crusoe has publicly stated the Abilene campus uses direct-to-chip liquid cooling, with closed-loop systems designed to minimize water evaporation, though the full water use picture across both campuses and their on-site power plants remains worth scrutiny. And in Taylor County, the groundwater that feeds both municipal supply and the shallow water table that sustains seasonal wetland depressions comes from a system that is already under stress. Abilene has spent years negotiating access to distant sources, including the Edwards Trinity Aquifer in Pecos County, specifically to secure a water supply capable of withstanding substantial droughts. That is not a city with water to spare. That is a city that has been engineering around scarcity for decades. Water allocation and use is an underlying conservation issue that affects wetlands across the southern Great Plains and may have potentially serious implications for the region's waterfowl. Add a campus drawing over 1 gigawatt of power with evaporative cooling systems running around the clock every day of the year, and the competition for that same stressed water table becomes something ranchers, farmers, and migrating birds are all enrolled in, whether they know it or not. But there is one more pressure the players face that has nothing to do with the water table. It is the light. Data center campuses of the scale being built west of Abilene generate significant artificial light pollution. Arrays of security lighting, facility illumination, and operational signage that turn a formerly dark stretch of West Texas sky into something that reads, from above, like a small city. Migratory birds navigate partly by starlight and by the natural gradient of darkness across the landscape. Artificial light at this scale is known to disorient nocturnal migrants, drawing them off course, causing them to circle exhausted above lit structures and sometimes to collide with them. The players below may still hold water, but the birds trying to find them at night are navigating through new interference. What is unfolding here, then, is not one pressure, but 3 arriving at the same time. Heat pushing into soil that native species depend on, water being drawn from a system already stretched thin, and light rewriting the navigational map that migratory species have followed across this landscape for longer than anyone has been here to record it. The shimmer on the horizon is not a mirage, and it is not going away. The Playa Lakes region is second only to the Gulf Coast in providing habitat for wintering waterfowl in the Central Flyway, and the rolling plains sit at its southern edge where the corridor narrows, and the stakes of losing even a handful of functional wetlands multiply across millions of birds. What happens in Abilene over the next decade will not stay in Abilene. Every arid region in the American West watching the AI infrastructure boom is watching this place to understand what the full cost actually looks like. Not in megawatts, but in soil temperatures, water tables, and the arcs of sandhill cranes crossing a West Texas sky that is no longer as dark or as welcoming as it once was. Subscribe for more on what AI is doing to places like this.